You are standing in the throne room of a pirate queen. The air is thick with the smell of wine and salt spray. Around you, warriors lean against limestone pillars, their hands never far from their weapons. You came here with words meant to intimidate, threats wrapped in the silk of diplomacy. You told this woman, this barbarian ruler in her fortress overlooking the Adriatic, that Rome does not negotiate with thieves, that if she cannot control her subjects, Rome will teach her how to rule. You expected submission, perhaps fear. Instead, she smiles. It is not a warm smile. It is the smile of someone who has already made a decision you will not live to understand. She waves her hand, dismissing you like a servant. You turn sharply, your Roman pride stinging, and march toward the harbor where your ship waits. The sunlight dances on the water. You think you have won. Then you feel the blade. It tears across your throat before you even see the man holding it. Your blood pools on the wooden planks, warm and impossibly red, and as your vision narrows to a pinpoint, you realize with perfect clarity you have just started a war with people who do not fear death. That murder in 230 B.C. was not just an assassination, it was a declaration, and Rome, drunk on its victory over Carthage, was about to learn that some enemies cannot be crushed by legions alone. Before we dive deeper into this forgotten war, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you're watching from. It genuinely amazes me that we can explore these ancient stories together, connected across continents by nothing but curiosity about the past. The man who died on that dock was Lucius Coruncanius, a Roman envoy whose arrogance exceeded his understanding. His killer answered to Queen Tuta of the Ardii, a woman Rome had dismissed as a grieving widow playing at power. They were catastrophically wrong. Tuta ruled over the Illyrian tribes, a loose confederation of warriors and sailors who controlled the jagged coastline of what is now Croatia, Albania, and Montenegro. To understand why her defiance mattered, you need to see the world through Roman eyes. In 230 B.C., Rome had just finished bleeding Carthage white in the First Punic War. The Senate looked at the Mediterranean and saw destiny a sea that would soon belong to them alone. But there was a problem. Every merchant ship sailing between Greece and Italy had to pass through a gauntlet of islands and hidden coves controlled by the Illyrians. And the Illyrians had turned piracy into a science. This was not random banditry. Under King Agron, Toida's late husband, the Ardii had transformed scattered raids into a state-sponsored enterprise. Agron was a warlord of the old breed, charismatic, ruthless, and legendarily fond of unmixed wine. After crushing the Aetolians in a spectacular victory, he celebrated so violently that he developed pleurisy and died within days, leaving the throne to his young wife. Rome saw weakness. They saw a woman struggling to hold together a kingdom of pirates. They sent Coruncanius and his brother to deliver an ultimatum: stop the raids or face consequences. The meeting was a collision of incompatible worldviews. When the Romans demanded Tuta end the piracy immediately, she looked at them with genuine confusion. In Illyrian culture, raiding was not a crime, it was an industry. She explained, with what seems to have been honest bewilderment, that it was not the custom of kings to prevent their subjects from profiting from the sea. The younger Coruncanius lost his temper. He insulted her laws, her people, and implicitly threatened invasion. He spoke to a sovereign queen as if she were a disobedient province. Tuta did not rage. She simply made a calculation. Her power depended on the loyalty of chieftains who expected plunder. If she bowed to Rome, she would be dead within a month, killed by her own people. If she killed the messenger, she would have a war, but at least she would have warriors behind her. So when Coruncanius walked back to his ship, convinced his threat had landed, he never saw the blade coming. The news reached Rome like a thunderclap. Killing an envoy violated jus gentium, the sacred law protecting diplomats even among enemies. The Senate did not debate. They mobilized both consuls, assembled 200 warships, and prepared to teach the barbarians a lesson in civilization. But as the Roman fleet lumbered into the Adriatic, oars churning the blue water white, they were sailing into a trap built by geography itself. The Illyrian kingdom was not a nation in any sense Rome understood. There were no paved roads, no forums, no senate chambers. Power flowed through kinship, reputation, and the distribution of plunder. The coast itself was the fortress, over 1,000 islands, hidden coves, and limestone cliffs that plunged vertically into water, so clear you could see 20 feet down. For a pirate, this terrain was paradise. For a Roman admiral, commanding heavy quinquiremes, massive 5-banked warships, designed to ram and board enemy vessels, it was a nightmare labyrinth. The Illyrians had adapted to this environment over centuries. They sailed vessels called lembi, sleek undecked boats, powered by a single bank of 50 oarsmen. To Roman eyes they looked like toys. That underestimation was fatal. A limbus had one devastating advantage: speed. It could skim over reefs that would gut a Roman warship. It could vanish up shallow river deltas where the heavy quinquiremes could not follow. And it cost a fraction of what Rome spent on a single galley. Illyrian tactics were pure asymmetry. They never lined up for the set-piece battles Rome craved. Instead, they operated in wolf packs, 4 or 5 lembi swarming a single transport, lashing alongside, flooding the deck with warriors before the Romans could react. You could sink 10 Illyrian ships to destroy one Roman vessel and still come out ahead economically. But Rome did not need to win every naval engagement. They needed to break the political structure holding the Illyrians together. And they found their weapon not in a battering ram, but in a man's ambition. His name was Demetrius of Pharos. He was Toyta's most trusted general, commanding the garrison on Corcyra, modern Corfu, the strategic key to the Adriatic. When the Roman armada appeared on the horizon, blocking out the sun with their sails, Demetrius did not rally his troops. He did the math. He saw Toyta's regency fracturing under Roman pressure. He saw limitless Roman resources. And he saw an opportunity. Demetrius sent a rowboat to the Roman flagship. The deal was struck in whispers. He surrendered Corcyra without bloodshed, and in return, Rome promised to install him as a client king. It was a masterpiece of Roman statecraft. They decapitated the Illyrian defense without losing a single soldier. With Corcyra gone, the chain reaction was swift. City after city opened its gates. Greek colonies that had suffered under Illyrian raids welcomed the legions as liberators. Teuta retreated deeper into the mountains, her fleet scattered, her allies gone. By 228 B.C., she had no choice but to surrender. The treaty was designed to humiliate. Teuta was stripped of her claims on Greek territories, forced to pay tribute, and forbidden from sailing more than 2 unarmed ships south of Lissus. The pirate queen had been caged. Rome declared victory and sailed home, leaving Demetrius of Pharos to watch over the Adriatic. They believed the problem was solved, but they had made a critical error. They had left a traitor in charge, and traitors, by definition, cannot be trusted. For several years, Demetrius played the role of loyal client. He collected tribute, kept the sea lanes open, and sent respectful reports to Rome. But all the while he was watching, waiting, and in 219 B.C., when Hannibal Barca began his march on Italy, dragging war elephants over the Alps, Demetrius saw his moment. Rome was paralyzed, staring at an existential threat from Carthage. Who would notice a few broken promises in the distant Adriatic? Demetrius tore up the treaty of 228 B.C. He sailed south with 50 warships, raiding the Cyclades and terrorizing Roman allies across Greece. But he did not stop at piracy. He married into the royal family of Macedon, forging an alliance with King Philip V. This was Rome's nightmare realized, a bridge between Illyrian naval power and Macedonian infantry, opening a second front while Hannibal ravaged Italy. The Senate could not ignore it. They dispatched Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a consul known for his brutal efficiency, to crush the rebellion. The Second Illyrian War was a surgical campaign. In less than a week, Paulus stormed the supposedly impregnable fortress of Demali. The speed of the assault shattered Illyrian morale. Demetrius retreated to his home island of Pharos, confident his fortifications would hold. But the Romans staged a fake landing that drew the defenders out of position, then ambushed them from behind with hidden forces. Caught in a pincer, Demetrius watched his army disintegrate, and true to his nature, he did not die with his men. While they were being slaughtered, he slipped onto a waiting ship and fled to Macedon. Rome had won again, but they had allowed the virus to escape. Demetrius would spend the rest of his life whispering poison into Philip V's ear, dragging Rome into decades of brutal war in the East. The pirate had become a kingmaker. 50 years later, in 168 B.C., a new Illyrian king named Gentius was about to repeat the same mistake, trusting the wrong ally. King Perseus of Macedon, desperate for help against Rome's unstoppable legions, looked at Gentius and saw a useful fool. He offered the Illyrian king 300 talents of silver to switch sides. It was a fortune. Gentius, wary of empty promises, demanded to see the money first. Perseus's envoys actually brought the silver to Illyria. They allowed Gentius to stamp his royal seal on the containers. Satisfied, Gentius committed the one act that would make his betrayal irreversible. He arrested 2 Roman ambassadors and threw them in prison. It was the point of no return, and the moment news reached Macedon, Perseus pulled the rug out. He ordered the silver brought back home, reasoning that Gentius was now at war with Rome whether he got paid or not. Gentius had sold his kingdom for a fortune he never touched. The Roman response was terrifying in its speed. Praetor Anicius Gallus launched a blitzkrieg that would make modern generals envious. The entire Third Illyrian War lasted 30 days. 30 days to dismantle a kingdom that had terrorized the Adriatic for over a century. Gentius retreated to the massive walls of Scodra, hoping to withstand a siege, but his heart wasn't in it. His treasury was empty, his army demoralized. He asked for a 3-day truce, hoping for a miracle. He spent those 3 days staring at the horizon, waiting for relief that would never come. When the truce expired, he did not sally out for a final stand. He walked through the gates, fell to his knees in the dirt before the Roman praetor, and begged for mercy. Rome was not kind. The kingdom was dissolved. Gentius and his family were shackled and paraded through the streets of Rome while crowds cheered. The pirate empire was dead. But for the common people left behind, the nightmare was just beginning. Rome sliced Illyria into 3 separate districts, forbidding marriage or trade between them. It was calculated amputation shattering the national identity that had produced warriors like Agron and queens like Teuta. But political division was just the beginning. The real exploitation was economic. Rome leased tax collection and mine operation to private corporations called publicani venture capitalists armed with swords. They bid for contracts in Rome, paying up front, which meant every denarius they squeezed from Illyria above that bid was pure profit. The result was industrial-scale horror. Thousands of Illyrian warriors who once ruled the Adriatic were marched into the suffocating darkness of silver mines. The tunnels were narrow, unventilated, lit only by oil lamps that burned up scarce oxygen. Miners worked shifts lasting days, chipping rock while inhaling silica dust that turned their lungs to stone. If the mines didn't kill them, the overseers did private enforcers who met quotas with whips and clubs. There was no oversight, no mercy, only the quota. The silver extracted from those mountains paved Roman streets and funded gladiator games. But in Illyria, the Pax Romana felt like a grave. For over a century the pressure built. The Illyrians were beaten, divided, enslaved, but not broken. In 06 AD, when Rome demanded auxiliary troops for an invasion of Germany, something snapped. The Illyrians gathered as ordered, armed with Roman weapons and trained in Roman tactics. But as they stood in formation, a dangerous realization swept through the ranks. We outnumber them, and we are armed. The rebellion exploded. Led by chieftains named Bato the Dezitiate and Bato the Bruci, the Illyrians turned their weapons on their Roman officers. Within days, the revolt spread like wildfire. This was the Bellum Batonianum, the War of the Batos, and it was not a distant border skirmish. The rebels marched on Italy itself. Panic gripped Rome. Emperor Augustus stood before the Senate and declared that unless drastic measures were taken, the enemy could be at the gates within 10 days. The empire mobilized everything. They stripped provinces of garrisons, bought freedom for slaves just to fill ranks. Rome ultimately fielded 15 legions, over half their entire military, to crush a piece of land the size of Bosnia. The war dragged on for 3 years. The Illyrians fought with the ferocity of men who knew this was their last chance, using the terrain to lure heavy Roman columns into mountain ambush and starving them out. Rome couldn't win by battle, so they won by extermination. Tiberius adopted a scorched earth policy, burning every village, slaughtering every herd, destroying every crop. In 09 AD, Bato the Dezitiate finally surrendered. When Tiberius asked him why his people had rebelled with such savagery, Bato delivered one of history's most cutting lines. "You Romans are to blame, for you send as guardians of your flocks not dogs or shepherds, but wolves." The revolt was crushed, but Rome learned something. If they couldn't destroy this warrior spirit, they would buy it, and that decision would save the empire. 2 centuries later, Rome was dying. The crisis of the 3rd century civil war, plague, economic collapse, invasion on every front. The empire had fractured into 3 pieces, and the end seemed inevitable. Salvation did not come from the marble halls of the Senate. It came from the limestone hills of the Balkans. After the great revolt, Rome had quietly filled its legions with Illyrian recruits men who grew up in the saddle, worshipped soldier gods, and viewed war as their natural element. By the mid-3rd century, the Roman army was effectively an Illyrian army, and since the army chose the emperor, the barbarians took the throne. Enter Aurelian. Born to a peasant family in Illyria, he rose through sheer lethality. His men called him Manu ad Ferrum, hand on hilt, because he was never unarmed. When he seized power in 270 A.D., he inherited a corpse of an empire. The Goths ravaged the north. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra had stolen the east. A breakaway Gallic empire controlled the west. Aurelian did not negotiate. In 5 years he did the impossible. He crushed the Goths, shattered Zenobia's armies in Syria, forced the Gallic usurper to his knees. He stitched the bleeding map back together with iron thread. The Senate, descendants of the men who had sneered at Teutul, had no choice but to bow before this rough-spoken soldier and grant him the title Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. Aurelian was just the beginning. He was followed by Diocletian, another Illyrian, who fundamentally reorganized the empire to survive another 1,000 years. The irony is staggering. The very people Rome had tried to exterminate in the Pirate Wars had become the only ones strong enough to save the idea of Rome. The wolves had become the shepherds. And when Constantine the Great, born in Nisus, deep in Illyrian lands, decided Rome itself was no longer worthy of being the capital, he built a new Rome on the Bosphorus, Constantinople. The Illyrian emperors did not just save the empire. They stole it. They moved the center of gravity away from the Italian aristocrats, who had once called them pirates, and placed it in their own backyard. The Byzantine Empire that followed, which preserved classical civilization for another 1,000 years while Western Europe fell into darkness, was built on Illyrian foundations. So what happened to the people themselves? When the Slavs swept into the Balkans in the 6th and 7th centuries, the Illyrian name faded from the maps. But peoples who survived Greeks, Celts, and Romans do not simply vanish. Linguists trace a direct line from the ancient Illyrians to modern Albanians. The Albanian language is a unique branch of the Indo-European tree, a living fossil preserving the speech of tribes that once defied legions. In the mountains of Albania and Kosovo, the code of Canaan, the fierce traditions of clan honor and unyielding independence echo the world of Tute and Agron. The Illyrians started as Rome's enemies, the other, the barbarian, the pirate. They were hunted, defeated, partitioned, enslaved. But they refused to be erased. They infiltrated the machine that tried to crush them, climbed to the highest throne in the world, and steered the ship of civilization through its darkest storm.